Unfortunately, this case is similar to many that we hear of. It involves a young couple who are supposed to be in love, but one ends up in prison for murder. The two people in this case are 23-year-old Alice Wood and 24-year-old Ryan Watson. Alice Wood grew up in Cheadle, Staffordshire, and as you'd probably expect, she came from a relatively ordinary background. She has two brothers, her mum's a doctor's receptionist, and her dad's a furniture salesman. Her childhood had been marked by divorce, with her parents separating when she was young, but by all accounts, both parents remained part of their life. She'd spend time at both of their homes. Unlike many of these cases, there's one thing that stood out about Alice from the very beginning of her life. She was very academically bright. Now, many sources deem her to be gifted, but I don't really like that terminology because it really downplays people's hard work. But at the time of this case, Alice was attending Cambridge University. She was pursuing a degree in theology, philosophy, and ethics. She was preparing for her final exams after being awarded a scholarship for a part-time research master's degree at Cambridge University. Old school friends recalled Alice being quiet and not very quick to anger when she was growing up. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you may notice that she is a lady with tattoos. But what isn't quite obvious from the pictures is that she actually had her school grades, her exam grades, tattooed on her arm. And again, according to an old school friend, at A-level she got 3 A stars. And she was one of the only pupils from that school to ever make it to the final selection stage at Oxford. Ryan Watson also grew up in Staffordshire, and he was deeply connected to his family and his friends. He was known for his love of sport, particularly football and BMX biking. He also loved animals, especially his dogs, which he had a close bond with. And I'm sure many of you will agree, but I think that often says a lot about a person. Ryan had a passion for helping people. In fact, his job that he was currently working, and it was fairly a new job, was working for Headway. Headway is a brain injury charity, and he was working there as a support worker. And at Headway, Ryan was known for his bubbly and outgoing personality. In general, Ryan was described as someone who brought light to social gatherings, often engaging and involving others in activities and in conversation. Now, before we get further into their relationship and before we get into the details of the case, it's important to me that we do the disclaimers. Let's not forget, this is a true crime case. It's a real story involving real people, and them real people have real families and friends. So although I do want you to comment, I do, and I do want you to share it, please do be sensitive as you do so. Now, it's not entirely clear how long Alice and Ryan had known each other, or even how they got to know each other, but it is clear that they started their relationship in March 2020. They'd only been together 6 months when they got engaged in September 2020. Just over a year later, they'd moved in to a house that they bought together on Oak Street in Rode Heath. They moved in there with 4 dogs, and they were starting to talk about starting a family. And then 6 months later, on Friday the 6th of May 2022, Alice and Ryan went to a 60th birthday party for a resident at the Headway charity. The party was at the Victoria Lounge Bar in Hanley, Stoke-on-Trent. Ryan drove to the party with Alice being his passenger. He was driving his own car, which was a white Fiat Punto. The plan was not only that he'd drive there, but it was his car, he was also going to drive back. Despite the plan for Ryan to drive back, both Alice and Ryan were drinking at the party. Throughout the evening, Ryan would be in his usual outgoing jolly self. The person at the party described him as working the room, and another one described him as the light of the table. By the sounds of it, Ryan was just being his usual self, being outgoing and gregarious. But if there is something else to be said about this party, Ryan and this woman called Tiffany were getting on really well. Now, obviously, I weren't there at this party, I didn't see it, so that's as much as I can say about it, but they were getting on really well by pretty much everyone's account. Now, again, like I've just said, it was Ryan's plan to drive home, but he'd been drinking a fair bit, and there became a point in the night where it was quite obvious that he'd had too much to drink to be able to drive home. And I think it's quite important to add here that Ryan had not long since passed his driving test, he'd not long since got his licence, so he was probably still on that probational period, and he was fairly new to his job. And although Alice had also been drinking, and she too was over the limit, in fact, it's reported that Alice had had 2 glasses of wine, 2 rums, and a glass of champagne, which is well over the limit. If it were double rum, just the rums alone would have put her about on the limit. But despite that, she took the decision that she would drive home in Ryan's car with Ryan, obviously. And at this point, home is about 9 miles away. It's said from the CCTV, it doesn't look overly obvious that Alice is in a bad mood at the party, and her and Ryan seem to be getting along just fine. However, by the time that they'd got back home to Oak Street, just after, ever so slightly after 11 o'clock, and Alice had parked Ryan's white Fiat Punto on Oak Street car park, obviously where they lived, the atmosphere between them had turned really bad. Now, we'll get on to the alleged reasons for this tension later, but I do think it's important you have a little bit of context. So, there's a claim that Alice accused Ryan of flirting with Tiffany and getting on a bit too long, but there's also claims of the opposite way around, that Alice was the one that was flirting with people and Ryan were jealous of that. So, as you'll see later on, there's opposite claims about the same thing, but vice versa. Anyway, now they're home, the neighbours can hear them arguing. There's doors being slammed, a male voice, supposedly Ryan, were overheard shouting, "Oh God, not this again." And it's quite heated, to the extent that Ryan got out the car, ran over to another car, and booted it, kicked it in frustration. At about 20 past 11, so not far off midnight now, Alice got into her own car, which is a Ford Fiesta, and she painstakingly drove it backwards and forwards repetitively, and what she was trying to do is manoeuvre it out. She'd parked Ryan's car too close to her own, blocking herself in essentially. And despite it being a close, tight gap, she was trying to get it out. And later on, she claimed her intention at this point, this very moment, her intention was to get in her car and drive away. I think she was going to her mum's where she was going to spend the night because things were that bad between her and Ryan. And again, at this point, she's over the limit, but her driving's not too bad at the minute. She's constantly back and forthing, but she's not crashing into either car. And this is something the judge later referred back to, saying at this point, you were fully in control of your car. However, she was unable to get out of the space, so she got back out of her car and got into the driver's seat of Ryan's Punto. Once in his car, she used only the handbrake. She didn't start the ignition, she just dropped the handbrake and rolled his car backwards to make more room for her car to get out. And at this point, Ryan's receiving text messages from a local youth, and he's also receiving Instagram calls from Tiffany. Yes, that's the Tiffany that was at the party, the Tiffany that he'd been getting on with a bit too well. And it's while that they're arguing, while Alice was manoeuvring these cars and stuff, there's all this tension between them, that Ryan, looking at his phone, walked away from Alice. And again, it's claimed here that this is where Alice, she broke. This was her breaking point. Enough was enough. Her response was to reverse her car at speed. Enough speed to hit Ryan's car and nudge it backwards. She then hit a concrete bollard, which were flattened in turn, and she also hit a metal bin. And it's said that at this point, Ryan was behind the car. She was reversing it in his direction. And she continued at this point, driving a car aggressively backwards and forwards on the car park. Ryan, who's on foot, is moving around the car, trying his best to avoid it. And of course, at this point, again, the neighbours are constantly hearing the revving of her car, the aggressive revving of Alice's car. Some seconds had passed, and by this point, Ryan is on Sandbach's Road, which is at the end of Oak Street. He's still holding his phone and probably paying attention to it. And at this point, Alice has got the car on Sandbach Road. And as she accelerated, she swerved the car, went full width of the pavement in the direction of Ryan. She'd swerved fully off-road in Ryan's direction and gone the full width of the pavement back onto Oak Street. And by her own admission later on, that this was intentional. She was trying to scare him. She was trying to intimidate him. And she did hit him. Whether intentional or not, at this point, she did hit him. And I think I've got some footage of that, so I'm going to put it on about now. As a result of the contact with Alice's car, Ryan was thrown backwards onto the bonnet, and his head hit the windscreen. Ryan slid off the bonnet and landed on his feet. Luckily, at the time, he seemed uninjured and still in possession of his phone. But just 3.7 seconds later, after he'd regained his feet, Alice reversed back. She reversed out of Oak Street onto Sandbank Road again. However, instead of reversing directly backwards, she reversed in an arc shape. It said that if she had intended to drive away at this point, she could have reversed directly backwards and just drove off. But she didn't. She reversed in this arc shape, and that left her directly pointing at Ryan. Facing at Ryan, should I say. At this point, Ryan was on the pavement holding his phone. Alice then accelerated. She drove directly at Ryan. She did hit him, and it dragged him under the car, and that's what led to his death. I say this purely for the information purposes, so when it comes to her defence, you know what was seen on the CCTV, but as she ran him over, the CCTV footages of 3 cameras can see the chassis bounce. Additionally to that, she later denies that she heard Ryan screaming, but his screams were heard on CCTV. Alice continued to drive for 158 metres to Keats Drive. Ryan was still trapped under the car. All of that had happened in just 2 minutes, from 24 minutes past 11 to 26 minutes past 11. Again, with only 3.7 seconds between the first impact and the fatal impact. After driving that additional 158 metres, Alice stopped the car and got out. When she got out, she saw Ryan's legs and a puddle of blood. She ran over to a nearby house and banged on the door. When the tenants of the house opened the door, Alice Wood said, "Please phone an ambulance. I think I've run over my boyfriend." Let's just look at that a little bit closer. I think. She said, "I think I've run over my boyfriend." It didn't take long for the paramedics to arrive, and when they did, there was no sign of life in Ryan. Ryan Watson was pronounced dead at the scene at 10 minutes to midnight. And of course, with an incident of this type, the police also attended the scene. And when they did, they gave Alice a breathalyzer test, a roadside breathalyzer test, and she was indeed still over the limit. At this point, she had 61 micrograms of alcohol per 100 millilitres of breath. Now, I like micrograms because the back calculation information I've got is in millilitres. She had 61 micrograms of alcohol per 100 millilitres of breath, which I think the limit of micrograms is 35. Anyway, the back calculation later showed that her blood alcohol concentration at the time of the fatal collision would have been approximately 136 milligrams of alcohol in 100 millilitres of blood. The limit would have been 60, so that's 1.5 times over the limit. But like I say, that's a back calculation, so it's not extremely precise, but it gives you a rough idea of at that time. And I just want to put my opinion in there, because although that is definitely over the limit and it's definitely unacceptable, I'm not trying to justify that. What I am trying to say is, I don't think that's that excessive of a drink. Like I said, 2 pints of standard ale or 2 pints of lager, 2 double spirits is what gets you to the limit. Roughly speaking, everyone's different. So that's just like having 3 pints. You know what I mean? She weren't massively over the limit. And my point of saying that is, I don't think there's any diminished responsibility there. Again, everyone acts different, and it is just my opinion. But I go, that's not that far over the limit. Just my opinion. She was then arrested, and I have some more footage, body cam footage, of her arrest from the police body cams. So I'm going to show you that now.
My wife called me, said it was an accident. I came down to have a look at where my was. About 10 minutes ago, there was a young lady in our house. She walked outside now with us, and she said to my wife and myself that she's the driver. They had an argument, and she drove over him.
Right, okay, so Alice, based on the circumstance that we found out already, okay, I'm going to arrest you on... No, listen to me, okay, I'm going to arrest you on suspicion of murder, okay, so you don't have to say anything, but behind your fence you don't mention now something later on in court. Anything you do say may be evidence, do you understand?
Upon her arrest, she told officers, "It's fine, I deserve it." During an interview on Saturday the 7th of May, Alice answered no comment to all questions put to her, and she was conditionally bailed. I have no idea what them conditions were, but in this setting it's usually you can't leave the country, you have to come back if we ask you to, them kind of conditions, and if you break them conditions, then they put out a warrant for your arrest. However, further evidence came to light, so she was further arrested and charged with murder on Thursday the 26th of May 2022. The pathologist favoured the cause of death was traumatic compressive asphyxia due to Ryan's torso and chest being compressed by the weight of the car. Alternatively or additionally, trauma to the chest and or head and or neck affecting the brain might have caused or contributed to his death. Over 40 separate sites of external injury were identified on Ryan's body, but for the most part they were made up of lacerations and abrasions, which were obviously caused by him being dragged along the road. Furthermore, and hopefully this was some sort of comfort to Ryan's family at this unimaginable, distressing time that let's hope none of us ever have to deal with, it was the opinion of the pathologist that his death would have likely been rapid and occurred very quickly. Leading up to the trial, Alice wrote a letter to the judge saying that she accepted sole responsibility but continued to deny murder, maintaining she used her car as a weapon of intimidation only. In other words, she's claiming that although she was trying to intimidate Ryan with a car, she didn't intend to kill him. The actual killing of Ryan was complete accident. Yeah, I was driving at him and I were trying to scare him, but I didn't mean to hit him, is what she's saying. And you may think, well, what difference does that make? You're pretty much saying you killed him, but you didn't mean to. Well, that has a massive impact upon the sentence. If that's accepted, Alice would only be charged with murder. Manslaughter, not murder. And there is a major difference between those sentences, because murder has to be a life sentence carrying a minimum term. Manslaughter, on the other hand, is very rarely a life sentence. Can be, but it's very rare. And as I've mentioned before, although in the UK life sentence doesn't mean life, it comes with that minimum term. So if you have a life sentence of 10 years, you have to serve that minimum 10 years. You will not hear from a parole board or anything else until them 10 years. On a manslaughter charge at 10 years, if there's no life term attached to that and it's just 10 years, that means you could serve a lot less. Sometimes potentially a third of a sentence. So you could get out after 3.5 years rather than 10. Again, life term minimum does not mean you'd get out after them 10 years. It just means that's when you can start speaking to the parole board. So it does make a major difference, manslaughter v murder. So on with the court. On the first day of court, Alice turned up in cuffs, obviously, and she had a book under her arm. Now the book was Meditations, which is a philosophy text by Roman Marcus Aurelius. Now, so many sources mentioned this, and I thought, well, is that relevant, or are they just trying to thicken out the article or the text, whatever? So I did my job right and I looked it up. And let's not forget, at this point, Alice had just been studying philosophy at university. She was prepping to sit her exams. And Meditations is a series of personal writings by Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor from AD 161 to 180, and it records his private notes to himself and ideas on Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius wrote 12 books on meditations. So I'd figured that I'd add that in too, because I'm not quite sure what to make of that. There's so many different reasons, so many different ways you can interpret that. So I figured I'd just include it in, because I do think it's a little bit relevant, and I do think it tells you something about Alice, but I can't quite figure out what it is, what the point you're trying to make there is. So please do let me know down in the comments what you think about that action of turning up with that specific book. Were it to show off her academic knowledge? I don't know. If you've read that book, you might have more in-depth knowledge of what that suggests. I don't know, let me know in the comments. Anyway, let's get on to Alice's account. Of course, Alice accepted that despite being over the limit, she drove Ryan's car home. But in Alice's version of events, soon as Ryan got in the car, he flipped. She said, "Straight away, he was accusing me of flirting with other men at the party, and he started calling me a slag, saying I'd embarrassed him and shown him up in front of everyone." She also made accusations that Ryan tried to jump out of the moving vehicle and that he tried to grab the steering wheel. These are accusations that the judge rejected. She explained that once they got home, she tried to find a phone to phone her dad to come and ask him to pick her up, but she couldn't find a phone. She went on to claim that she repeatedly asked Ryan if she could borrow his phone to phone her dad, but he erupted. According to her, he completely erupted. He grabbed her by the ear extensions, leant her over the hob while he held the ignition switch, and said, "Ask me one more fucking time." So, her claim continues. She then went outside to get into the driver's seat of a car, and while she's in the driver's seat and Ryan's outside the car, the argument continued. She told the jury, "I'd said it for a final time. Ryan, just go inside. Just go to bed and I'll be back in the morning. I'm going to my mum's." And after that he said, "Your mum's fucking dead." And at this point, as she's telling the court her version of events, she's crying, and apparently she did cry a fair few times through the trial, especially giving evidence. And she said that Ryan had threatened to send someone round to her mum's house to knife her up, meaning her mum, not her. This was apparently the point where she got really angry. She reversed back, hit Ryan's car, the bollard and the bin, before reversing onto Sandbach Road. And again, it's at this point that she decides, do you know what? I'm going to swerve the car off the road towards Ryan to scare him. A direct claim is, he'd scared me, and I know it doesn't make it excusable, but in my head at the time, I just felt so frightened, and I wanted him to feel like I did. She claimed she was shocked when Ryan hit the windscreen, but then recalled seeing him back on his feet, adding that she reversed one more time before she drove down Sandbach Road. She accepted that she'd hit Ryan, knocked him down, and his body had gone under the car, but she still denied seeing him in front of the car before that happened. She explained to the court that it felt like the car weren't accelerating properly, or weren't accelerating as it should, and after a short distance down the road, she stopped and got out of the car. Still crying, she told the courtroom, "It was like stepping into a nightmare because I could see Ryan underneath the car. It was like I was in hell. It didn't seem real." She agreed during the trial. After that night, she saw a medical professional because she was struggling and heartbroken. Additionally to that, the Crown Prosecution Service reported that, presumably while she was on bail, she told her GP that her boyfriend had died the previous week, having jumped in front of her car. But obviously, this is a murder trial. Alice wasn't the only witness called to the stand. The court heard that some guests at the party had detected friction between them two, and that while Ryan had been working the room and enjoying himself, Alice would claim to be cold and wasn't best pleased with his behaviour. Tiffany, who I mentioned earlier, was at the trial, and she told the court that herself and Ryan had clicked and that Alice had been pretty much left out of the conversation. She described Ryan, who she'd met a couple of times before, as very happy, jolly and bubbly. She said, "Ryan was the light of the table. He was dancing with us all. He was involving everyone. Alice didn't really seem to get involved." She said at one point, Alice told Ryan to watch what you're drinking. And to be fair, I don't read much into that. He's supposed to be driving home, so that could be one reason. He's also at a work party, that's a new job, so that could be another reason. Not defending anything there, that's just how I perceive that comment. Tiffany also stated it felt like she was getting stared at by Alice for much of the night. And Tiffany agreed that she thought Alice was staring at her for much of the night because of the way that her and Ryan were behaving together. Tiffany had been at this party with her mom, who uses the Edway charity, and she left before Ryan and Alice did. But shortly after 11 p.m, which is about the time that Ryan and Alice got home, she received 3 missed calls from an Instagram account called Rye, R-Y. She later learned that this account belonged to Ryan, but at the time she tried to ring back, but there was no answer. So she messaged the account saying, "Who's this?" And that explains the missed call on Ryan's phone from Tiffany. The neighbour who Alice knocked on the door for help, they told the court that the time that she knocked on the door, she was already trying to justify her actions. She told the people at the door that Ryan had become jealous and he was accusing her of flirting with other men. As I said earlier, this case, obviously Ryan can't give his account, unfortunately, but she's saying that Ryan were accusing her, and it was the prosecution's case that actually that didn't happen. There's no evidence that she were even talking to other men. What did happen is Ryan was getting along with this other woman, Maybe he were, maybe he weren't flirting, but Tiffany was the jealous one, not Ryan. And this neighbour who she's asking for help said Alice was distressed, but she wasn't crying. In a statement read to the court, a neighbour closer to their home said that at some time after 11 p.m, she heard footsteps of two people walking, and she believed it to be Alice and Ryan returning home to Oak Street. She said, I heard Ryan shout something like, "Oh God, not this again." Then I heard footsteps walking away. A neighbour who lives on Sandback Road told the court that she heard the sound of a metal crunching, and that's what woke her up. That was at about 11:30. She looked out the window and she saw a man arguing with somebody inside a car. She did say that she saw the car move towards the man, adding, it looked like it was designed to intimidate and scare them a little bit. PC Robinson told the court he was called to the scene at 20 minutes to midnight, and when he got there, Alice Wood's Ford Fiesta was on the street with a man's body underneath it. He said he was informed that a female connected to the incident was in a nearby address, and he established that she was arrested on suspicion of murder. He said that Alice Wood was sitting on the sofa in the living room of the house and she was sobbing. He added, I could smell alcohol. She appeared drunk. He said that she was arrested on suspicion of murder by his colleague, and then she was breathalyzed, and then she was arrested on suspicion of drink driving. He said as they travelled to custody in the police van, his colleague explained what would happen when they got to a police station, and Alice Wood replied, "That's fine, I deserve it." His colleague explained, "Look, everyone's going to look after you, you're going to be alright," and she replied, "I don't deserve it." He confirmed that throughout Alice were compliant, and when they got to the police station, a further breathalyzer test were conducted. On a couple of occasions, she said words to the effect, "You should just shoot me in the head," while she was crying. Of course, the court was shown a lot of body cam footage, both of her arrest and on the way to the police station. So, with all that being said, on Tuesday, the 2nd of January 2024, after a 3-week trial, or 13 days to be precise, it took the jury just 8 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Their verdict rejected Alice's claim to manslaughter and found her guilty of murder. While remanding her back into custody, awaiting a sentence, the judge told her she may never be released. She was sentenced on Friday, the 2nd of February 2024, and it's a murder charge. So as I explained earlier, there's only one sentence applicable, and that's life. At the time of the sentencing, Alice Wood was 24-year-old with no previous convictions. The starting point for Alice's minimum term was set at 15 years. The aggravating factors of this case were the fact that it used a highly dangerous weapon, i.e. the car. Ryan was a vulnerable man because he was a pedestrian, he was holding his phone, and he was on the pavement. Additionally, he'd been drinking. In all, he's vulnerable because this is a big vehicle and there's no way he could have avoided the fatal impact. Alice had also been drinking. The repeated, hostile and aggressive driving against Ryan leading up to the fatal collision. The mental and physical suffering prior to his death. The judge explained there that although Ryan's death would have been quick, it weren't instantaneous, so therefore his suffering was an aggravating factor. The judge then went on to mitigating factors, and quite possibly cruel there, or just informative, the judge explained to Alice that if he deemed that Alice didn't mean to, it weren't her intention to kill him, only to intimidate him, then that could be a massive, major mitigating factor, and it could put a modest reduction on a sentence. But then he told her that that's not going to apply, because he believed that she did intend to kill him. There were, however, other mitigating factors. Alice had no previous convictions, not even a motoring offence. Her good previous character. He said that according to witness statements from friends and family, that she'd acted out a character. That were also allegedly backed up by her academic prowess. Her age was a mitigating factor. She was only 22 at the time of the killing. She didn't attempt to flee the scene. Her personal circumstances were also a mitigating factor here. The fact that she'd be unable to support her parents as they got older, a recent history of depression, anxiety, and struggling with alcohol. And again, the judge weren't very sympathetic here. He added that a mitigating factor would be that prison would be hard for Alice. But he then worried that by adding, but you only have yourself to blame for the situation you find yourself in. This judge were really quite brutal compared to other sentencing statements. Before leading on to the actual sentence, the judge also confirmed that as far as they were concerned, Alice hadn't shown any remorse. With all that being said, the judge sentenced Alice Wood to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years, less than 616 days that she'd spent on remand. As you know, after the trial, I always like to read just some of or all of the family statements, the impact statement, so I'm going to get onto that now. Today we finally got justice for our beloved son Ryan. Ryan's death has left our family heartbroken. He was taken from us far too soon. He was just a young man, 24 years old, with his whole life ahead of him. He had just started his career working for the charity Headway and helping other people, which is what he loved to do. Ryan had such a big personality. He was a bubbly, fun-loving, caring person with a heart of gold who would do anything for anyone. Ryan loved animals and his dogs. Ryan was always good at sports like football, BMX biking and pool. He loved hanging out with his mates and playing music. He will forever be missed. All his family and friends are heartbroken to know we never get to see him again. Words can't express how devastated and lost we are without Ryan. He touched the hearts and enriched the lives of everyone who knew him. We only had 24 years together, but we are proud to say he was our son and a fantastic big brother. We are grateful today that we got justice for Ryan. It's been so hard to watch the CCTV footage of our son getting hit by a car over and over again, and then dragged up the road, still being trapped under the car. I can't imagine how scared Ryan must have been at that moment. The one person Ryan trusted the most is the person who took his life in such a violent way. I am living a nightmare knowing my son's last moments were so brutal. We saw the CCTV footage of a party that night. We were so proud to see him being such a gentleman to everyone, even helping an old lady who had fallen over. He was the life and soul of the party that night. Alice is in prison where she belongs, but no sentence is going to be long enough for what she was taken from us and Ryan. He'll never get to live his life and fulfill his dreams. We would like to thank all the emergency services and the people at the scene who helped Ryan. To Cheshire Police, Nigel Parr and the major investigation team. Liaison officers Tom, Kerry and Kate, thank you for your support we have received through this difficult time. A special thank you to the outstanding work from Mr. Ford and his team at the CPS. Thank you to all the jury and His Honour Judge Lehman. Thank you for all your hard work to help get this fair verdict and justice for Ryan. That's all I've got for you. And you know, one of the many hard things about writing and presenting a case is that you don't know anyone that's involved. And that makes it really hard to try and understand what happened. I'm not saying it'd be easier if you directly knew one of the people, but that is why I try to make these cases so unbiased. And I also struggle a lot with the morals when I choose a case. And it's one of the main things I ask myself, is there a benefit to anybody for me covering this case? I think what a lot of people don't realise is I always get comments, I knew this person, that's my son, that's my mom, and that is hard. So for me, I have to make sure that when I cover a case, there's a reason behind it. I always try to honour the victims. I always try to make sure that the perpetrator's known for what they did. Now, sometimes I do just cover a case because it's outright horrific and I feel that it needs to be told. The perpetrator needs to be known and recognised. I mean, I've covered cases that the minimum sentence is 8 years. In 8 years, that person's going to get out. They need to be recognised for what they did. And if you believe you have another chance, then whatever, but they shouldn't be able to hide from what they did. They took someone's life. My point is, I don't just like to cover random cases to get viewed. As my disclaimer says, these are real people. Their families are real. They have feelings and they do hear about these videos and news articles. That I genuinely think that's the only thing that separates me from a traditional journalist. The fact that I try to put compassion, I try to put reason behind, and I try to give that bit of advice at the end of a video. But that's just it, right? I am absolutely sick of domestic homicides. There is hundreds every year after year. And it's so unnecessary. It's so avoidable. It needs to stop. And this one stands out even more because, like I said, I don't know the people, but there isn't anyone anywhere that I've seen in my research that says either one of them was inherently abusive to the other. Alright, Alice's claim says that night Ryan would have been abusive, according to Alice, but even she didn't say, oh, he's been like this for ages. Be it true what happened that night or not, there's still no claim that this was an abusive relationship. So this is even worse than usual because there's no signs leading up to this. It was just a spur of a moment thing, as it seems. Again, I don't know that for a fact. But I'm also, and I've expressed this in other videos before, I am fed up of politicians and the news talking about femicide. Making it about women, making it about men. No, I'm sorry, domestic homicide is domestic homicide. Why do we have to make it about gender? And yeah, okay, the majority of domestic homicide victims are female. But males aren't the problem here. Domestic homicide, domestic abuse is the problem here. And as I said, I can't rule out or clarify whether there was abuse in this relationship from either side. However, what is abundantly clear is there was jealousy in this relationship from either both sides or just one side. So for a change, instead of talking about how to identify abuse in a relationship, of how to avoid it, yada yada, I'm actually going to talk about the perpetrators. I'm going to talk about jealousy. Everybody can and everybody does get jealous. It's a human emotion. It's how you react to jealousy that is important. And there is help for insecure people if you're insecure. Before I get onto it, I do want to point out that this isn't my advice. I'm not thinking I'm some saviour of knowledge. This is advice that I've researched and put together. I'm not a therapist. If you need help, go and get help. It's just a little bit of information, but I hope can help you if you're not willing to get help. First of all, acknowledge and talk about your jealousy. Seriously. Rather than getting angry because you're jealous over something or getting upset because you're jealous about something, make your feelings known in a calm and mature way. That doesn't mean stand up in front of everyone and say, oh, I'm jealous, rah. No, it just means say to your partner, look, I'm feeling a bit jealous right now. Do you like him? I feel like you're flirting a bit. In a calm way, and handle it in a calm way. If you don't like the response you get, walk away. In a healthy relationship, you should both work together to either correct the other person's behaviour or realise that you're being insecure. You should both be able to work together, and that's when it's a toxic relationship, when not both partners can work together like that. But again, there's a right and wrong way to go about that. You can't just stand up and make a scene. That's not the right way to go about it. That's not talking about it and being mature. If neither occur, if you try and have this conversation and it leads to a massive argument or something, maybe it's just time to walk away. Maybe this relationship isn't working. And look at it from both sides. Both the perpetrator and the person that is feeling jealous. Look at it on both sides. I always think the way I'm behaving now, if my partner were behaving like that, would that be acceptable? Or would I get the face on? Right, I best stop behaving like I'm doing. Or vice versa, if you were doing that and your partner got face on, would you think what you're getting face on for? Look at it from both perspectives. And don't be afraid to back down and ask yourself that. Because like I say, it does work kind of going, actually, I can see their point of view before they even have to say anything. If you're not sure if you're being insecure or actually you have a right to be jealous and they're not necessarily thinking about your feelings, ask your family, ask your friends. If you haven't got any, ask someone online. Seriously, talk about it. Because sometimes that's the only way to get actual clarity by someone else's perspective. Now, additional disclaimer to that, for the longevity of your relationship, try not to put that person down. If it's an abusive relationship, obviously, talk about how abusive they are. But don't just bring out all the dirty laundry, because that might affect how your family and friends see your partner in the future. But do try and get that outside perspective, especially if you can't both agree on what's acceptable and what's not. We also have to consider, is your partner doing it on purpose? If you can't see eye to eye on these things, and you are actually thinking, she's dancing with that person and she keeps looking over to see if I'm looking, they're doing it on purpose, they're trying to wind you up, it's toxic, get out of that relationship. Don't get angry about it, walk off, live a better life, find a better partner. See, these things really do cross with abusive relationships. And I'm not saying here that Ryan were purposely trying to make Alice jealous. This is a separate part of the video. It's just advice trying to get people that feel jealous to work it out in a much better way. If you think that person's purposely trying to make you jealous, either you're insecure or that person's toxic. It's not a mature thing to do to try and make someone feel jealous, no matter what the reason behind it is. If you still want to be that person, don't rise to it, walk away, calm down, talk to them the next day. Always lead for de-escalation. And I get in a jealous situation you might not want to walk away because it feels like you're giving up control. But in that moment, do you really have control? And nothing you can do will make you gain control. Like I said, the best thing is to walk away, calm down. And if the worst case happens, whatever you're thinking might happen if you walk away, end it. You'll find someone better if that person isn't loyal or whatever else. If you're not meant to be, you're not meant to be. You can't make someone be loyal. You can't make someone love you. Violence, aggression, coercive control is never the right answer. And there is always a better life out there. Now, of course, if you find yourself jealous quite often over little things, have it in your head. Have that conversation with yourself and think, is it me? Do I get jealous over little things? Because I'm not going to lie, I can be insecure. And I've told Stepfist many times, look, sometimes I can be insecure. And I'm really sorry about that. But I know that I'm being insecure. So when I'm feeling a little bit jealous, I don't make a scene out of it. Most of the time, I don't mention it. It runs through my head of, is that what's happening? Or are you just in a bad headspace right now and you're thinking that's what's happening? And 99% of the time I go, idiot. That just doesn't make sense. And that's it. But like I said, the biggest point here is the argument isn't going to fix anything. It's going to make things worse. The making a scene's not going to fix anything. It's going to make something worse. Now, if you do have a major problem with insecurities and you cannot get that headspace, I agree that you might lose control and you just can't get your brain to engage in that moment, then it is a good thing that you know that. You need to talk to a therapist or a doctor or even just seek out advice online. Because if not, it's just going to get worse in your head. Your head will get darker and cloudier and you'll get more and more worked up. So the best thing you can do for your relationship, if you want to stay together, then go and seek advice from a professional that will give you coping tips and everything else and a better way to work out your head. I'm not a professional. This is advice that I've put together from advice online, from therapy websites and stuff. And I will, as I always do, put links in the description below on how, for charities in the top 3 countries, charities or professionals that you can reach out to and talk to. I know there's at least one charity in the UK that focuses on people that have got them insecurity problems and stuff. And again, I'm not saying jealousy is an insecurity always. Like I said, it is a very grey area because you can get people that are over flirtatious and they want you to feel like you're being insecure. But this is why it's important to talk it out between each other. And it's also important, if you can't agree to bring someone else in, be it a therapist or a family or a friend. I think I've rambled on enough. But again, I think it's worth saying because too many cases talk about the case and then leave it. When actually there might be one person that's watching this that thinks, you know what, I'm insecure quite a lot. My partner tells me that I am trying to see a therapist. Again, alright. Again, it's better to see a therapist than not do anything because you might see this therapist and they might say, actually, you're not insecure, they're an arsehole. You know, so it is just better that you get help. Don't just struggle on with it. There is ways to move forward and improve, not just yourself, but the relationship as well. Ramble over. Hopefully that'll help someone. And you not only help someone, but you can pass that information on if you see that that's been a problem. Check the description below for links. All I'm saying is, I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And I'll see you real soon. Bye.